Hello and welcome to another virtual author event at the Poison Pen Bookstore. I'm John Charles. I'm delighted to have with us two of the Poison Pen's favorite authors, Jayne and Krentz and JT Ellison, who are going to do another episode of what they're calling Behind the Pen. Now, the background to this is a few weeks ago, JT and Jayne interviewed Barbara on the anniversary of the store's opening 32 years ago, and they did such a smashing job with that interview with Barbara. She insisted that they go on and talk to other members of the Poison Pen Bookstore. Unfortunately, I was not there that day, so I got nominated to be the first, and that's why you're getting to hear from me today. I'm John Charles. I've been with the Poison Pen for about 6 years, and I'm delighted to have two of my favorite authors here today. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Jayne and JT for their questions.
Well, thank you. We are thrilled to be here. This is very exciting for us, and thanks to Barbara for letting us do this, because the Poison Pen is one of the most successful bookstores in the nation, and you are one of the people who makes it work. That before you landed this cool job selling books, you were a public librarian and then a reviewer, and I should add you were still a reviewer. Mm-hmm. Can you talk about your journey from librarian through reviewer and into book selling?
Well, I almost wasn't a librarian. That's the story there. I was born in Wyoming, moved to Arizona at a young age with my family, went to school here. I started working at the Scottsdale Public Library in high school as a part-time job, continued on when I was at college at Arizona State University. My bachelor's degree was in economics, and the original plan was to go into banking. I thought it would be glamorous. It was the 80s, money, Wall Street, all that stuff. But I took a class in international finance and discovered that if they put me in a bank, that bank would lose money rapidly. So I had to rethink career options at that point. And I always loved working at the library part-time. I loved books. I was a reader from a young age. I just never thought that would be a career kind of thing. But since banking was out, I had to recalibrate, and libraries it was. So I went on and got my master's degree in library science at University of Arizona, went to Maryland for a couple years to get my first professional credentials, came back to Scottsdale, worked there for another 20 or so years before retiring in 2015 and coming to work at the Poison Pen part-time here. As far as reviewing goes, I first started as a reviewer back in Maryland in the early 90s. There was an ad in Library Journal, which is one of the professional journals, saying they were looking for library staff interested in reviewing for them. And I filled out the questionnaire. You kind of do a reviewer questionnaire about what special interests you have, what fields you're skilled in. Sent it in, and they were happy to add me to their review roster for nonfiction books. And at that time, you would either type up your review and mail it in, or they had this exciting new technology called fax machines, and we were all agog over that. You could fax your review in and get it in that much faster. So that was the early 90s. At that point, romance fiction and libraries did not exactly have a happy partnership or arrangement. For years, libraries, and I think even some bookstores, kind of looked down on romance fiction if they didn't actively disdain to stock it. That all kind of started changing in the 1990s. About 1993 or 94, I'm not sure which year, but it was early on. Library Journal was actually the first professional review source to give romances a dedicated column. It was done 3 times a year. It was written by Kristen Ramsdale, who's an academic librarian in California. She's a reader, lover of romance, very knowledgeable, and she kind of broke ground for that, the idea that libraries should take romance fiction seriously. A few years later, Booklist, which is the publication for the American Library Association, they have been around for 100 years or so. They review adult fiction and nonfiction, children's fiction and nonfiction for libraries to help them select materials primarily. They decided that they needed to join Library Journal and start getting with the program. So they began reviewing romance fiction. And I was at a Romance Writers of America conference talking to another librarian, Ann Baricious, and she said she was reviewing for Booklist. And it was exciting and fun. And I thought, well, that sounds interesting. And of course, there's always free books involved at that point. So I told her, sure, give my name to the editor and see what happens. And Donna Seaman, who was the editor of adult fiction at Booklist, then wrote back very nicely and said, sure, we'd love to add you. And this was 1999. And she started sending me books to review, and I have been reviewing for Booklist ever since, romance fiction primarily.
So what happened when you got to the pen and Barbara turned you loose on the romance shelves?
Well, it was interesting because I think the things that I've done to try to help increase the sales of romance fiction, the awareness of romance fiction, are pretty basic things, but it starts with increasing the number of titles available in the store. That sounds pretty obvious, but if people can't find books to purchase, they're not going to purchase them. Increase the number of romance titles available online. We do probably more than 3/4 of our sales through mail order and online sales. So if you can find things there, that's important too. Barbara had been doing a newsletter monthly, e-newsletter called the Book News. She asked me to do kind of another monthly publication called Book Notes, and I tried to pull more of the focus in that on other genres, so like romance fiction, teen books, nonfiction, so they get some exposure there. We've also been increasing the number of author events before the pandemic in person, now virtually, with romance authors and women's fiction authors. So that's another way that we try to really increase the awareness, the ability, the availability of all those titles to readers. And I really do try to keep an eye out for local Arizona romance authors. And there's a small core of them there that we try to make sure we work with them to do what we can to stock their books.
You guys you just kind of blow my mind how egalitarian everything is. You know, so many bookstores, so many indie bookstores, like, we will only do this, we will only do this. And that's the beauty of the pen. Y'all have just opened your doors to everyone. And if it's a great book, it's a great book. And I just respect that so much about y'all. Thank you for doing that for all of us.
Thank you for writing such wonderful books. It makes it easy.
We have like 100 different fun questions. Jayne, do you want to run through them? Do you want to swap them? How do you want to do it?
Oh, there were so many I had to actually print out a list.
I know, I've got my iPad here. That's why I keep looking over here on my iPad.
Before we leave the subject, the reviews, that brings us to, what do you look for as a professional reviewer? What are you looking for in a book, and what is it that distinguishes the romance? What makes that its own genre?
Well, I think any reviewer for a professional journal, whether it's Booklist or Publishers Weekly or a library journal, a newspaper, the key thing is, at least for me, is to look at the book and decide, has the author succeeded in what they had started out to achieve? So if you're writing romantic suspense, is there a good mix of suspense and romance in the story? Is the pacing appropriate to the plot? Are the characters kind of integrated into the storyline and not just kind of chess pieces that are moved around? And does the author bring something new, maybe, or different to the setting, to the storyline, to the plot? Is there a twist, unique twist? Those are all things to look at. For romance fiction, the romance genre does have just two main criteria. One is the focus be on the protagonists and their romantic relationship. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be other elements to the story. There can be like a hunt for treasure, a historical period with wars and events. All those things can be in the story, but the focus of the story should be on that romantic relationship. And the second, and this is sometimes people who don't read romance kind of make fun of it, and they don't always totally understand it, but romance readers expect what used to be called happily ever after ending, or HEA, and now it's sometimes referred to as happily for now ending, HFN, because we realize that not every couple is going to experience their golden wedding anniversary, but as long as they're together at the end of the book and things seem like they're promising for their future romantic wise, we're happy. So a romance novel needs to be sure that those two elements are in the story, but that leaves a lot of room for writers to go off in a lot of different directions. So basically, as long as they're succeeding in what they set out to achieve, that's the important thing, and delivering a good story to readers. I think for me, and I should stop and say, the views expressed by myself today do not reflect those of the Poison Pen or Jayne and Krentz or J.T. Ellison. They're just my thoughts. So don't take it out on anyone personally other than me. But I think if you're reviewing professionally, you need to take yourself out of the equation. I've read, as a reader, I've read reviews where the reviewer says, I didn't like this book because I don't like books set in Kentucky and the two characters were minors. And like, well, that's great, but was the book good, or is it just that you didn't like books set in Kentucky and they were minors? I mean, if they write a good story, it doesn't matter whether you personally as a reader enjoy that particular subgenre or that kind of book. It's what the author wants to do. Have they done it? Are there other readers out there that would like the book? And that's what you should focus on.
So do you like romance?
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay. I was just curious, because what took you from reviewing nonfiction to romance? Was there something about it that you were like, hey, I want to make this happen? Or is there something about the stories that appeals to you?
I am a big romance reader. I kind of had that moment, the road to Damascus moment or something like that, when I discovered romance fiction. I originally read mysteries when I was growing up. It was Encyclopedia Brown and Alfred Hitchcock and the Three Investigators, and then I moved into Agatha Christie and all those. Discovered romance fiction when I was actually in college at the library. I was sorting books back in circulation, getting them ready to go back to the shelves. I pulled this one book by the cover, and we're not supposed to do that. We don't judge books by covers, but covers do draw the reader in. It happened to be Borrower of the Night by Elizabeth Peters. And that was kind of her spoof of Gothics, though I didn't realize it at the time, not being familiar. But I loved Elizabeth Peters, still do. Discovered she'd written more kind of romantic suspense type stories. She'd written Gothics as Barbara Michaels. That led me to Phyllis A. Whitney and all these other authors. And finally, by the 90s, I was a full-blown romance reader.
For which we are very grateful, those of us who write romance. You've been an incredible supporter of the genre, and you've celebrated it and really brought it into the mainstream, not only in the bookstores, but also in libraries. And that's in this, we all know in this culture, if a book is in the library, it's a real book. That's how we, to segue off of that comment about the mystery authors and the suspense authors, a lot of romance authors have made the transition into thrillers or into suspense. What is it about those two genres that enables those writers to move so smoothly between those genres and combine them? What is it about romance that makes a Sandra Brown or Catherine Coulter or the other authors that have done that leap?
Yes, you usually see romance authors are able to transition to other genres. Very few writers from other genres have been able to successfully move into romance fiction. I could say a few best-selling names, but I won't at this point. I think it's because romance writers, if they're to be successful and to get a readership, they have to master characterization. That's the key to romance. And once you have the ability to write compelling characters, you can do a lot with that. Romance writers also, the romance genre is very diverse. I mean, you have contemporary romance, historical romance, romantic suspense, paranormal romance. Romance authors are used to juggling a lot of different things in their stories. So making a transition to suspense for some authors might mean, okay, I just dial back the romance element of the story a little bit and push up the thriller aspects or the suspense aspects. Romance authors are among some of the most talented writers out there. They really know what they're doing. They know what their readers want. And a lot of them kind of cut their teeth writing for publishers like Harlequin and Silhouette, where they were given specific things targets they had to hit, so to speak, within a book. And if they didn't hit it, they weren't successful. So they knew how to do that. They know how to write to those things. In fact, you could say a thing or two about that, Jayne.
We won't go there. This is all on you. The spotlight's on you. One of the things that we have both observed happening within the romance genre has been an incredible, not only additional diversity, but just a flowering of various subgenres. I have always said that one of the reasons romance got away with so many experiments and so many various kinds of subgenre, creating so many subgenres, was precisely because nobody did take us seriously and there were no rules.
Mhm.
And I think that has helped make the genre very fluid, very fast changing. You talk about some of the trends and changes and things that you have seen over the years.
Well, it's interesting because I think in romance fiction, like in some other genres, trends are cyclical. I mean, you can talk about something like, I mentioned how I found Gothics, and they were big in the 60s and the 70s. And then they kind of came back again in the late 80s and the early 90s. Kensington was publishing some as mass markets. Harlequin and Silhouette had their Shadows line, which was kind of paranormal, spooky, dark romance with Gothic elements. And now, like in the last couple of years, there's been kind of whispers of the Gothic coming back into romance fiction, even mystery fiction and horror. They kind of go all different directions with that. So you have that kind of cyclical thing. I see the same thing happening. Contemporary romance, especially romantic comedies, have been the flavor of the month for romance fiction for at least the last 3 or 4 years, and they continue to seem to be going strong. But when you stop and think about it, chick lit back in the late 1990s, early 2000s, that was the precursor to romantic comedy. So we're kind of reinventing that again now. And what came after chick lit, but paranormal romances. And I'm starting to see more paranormal romances cropping up at different publishers and even indie published by authors. So I think paranormal romance is going to maybe kind of swing into high gear again, like it did in the early 2000s and 20 teens, which I guess is good news for your Jayne Castle alter ego.
I don't know. Looking out at the scene, I think I should have gone with witches.
Well, that was something I was going to mention. There's like a whole explosion in witch romances. Maybe it's just Halloween, but yeah, some mini trends that I kind of see are romances set in the movie world or the television world, several with reality television competition kind of settings, or on the set of there was one, I Kissed a Girl by Jen Alexander that came out this year. She's a makeup artist. The other protagonist is a B-movie scream queen who's kind of getting her restart in the movie business. So that's how they meet. Romances with cats and dogs in the last couple of years. I think they're taking their cue from mysteries because there's a lot of mysteries where pets play a role, but Julia London has had a couple come out this year. Kate McMurray has one set at a cat cafe in Brooklyn. Lizzie Shane has another one in a small town with a kind of a volunteer pet rescue operation that works out of there. So that's another trend, what I call book-centric romances. So books set in bookstores, libraries, and the publishing world. For some reason, people think it's such a romantic, exciting business. Those of us that actually have to work in it would probably tell you not all the time, but it does have that kind of illusion, glamour, and exciting. You're around books all the time, and it's like you've got mail and that kind of thing. And also sweeter romances. I think there's a trend towards some readers wanting to be able to identify the sensuality level in a romance, and they're wanting something on the sweeter side. Hallmark, which kind of built a whole following with their movie channels and things like that, they now have a publishing line of romances that they do. And even smaller presses like Shadow Mountain Publishing has a proper romance line that they're calling it, which is the sweeter romances. So I think that's giving readers even more options.
It strikes me there's a huge amount of diversity in the romance world now. It has, I mean, it's everybody, everything, all of these books. Is that something that goes cyclical as well? Or is this something that's just in this moment that we finally are getting some representation from the LGBTQ and all of this?
I think this is something that's actually been a long time coming, but it finally is here.
It's finally here.
I think there's been a lot of push from authors and readers who want to see their world reflected in their romance novels. It's not that romance fiction was totally shut out. I mean, Sandra Kitt, who is a librarian herself, was one of the first African-American writers to write for Harlequin, and that was back in the 90s. And you have other authors like Shirley Hailstock and Frances Ray. And I mean, writers could get in the door. It's just you didn't see a lot of them. And now I think you really are seeing publishing tends to be scared, I think, of new things. And they don't want to gamble and risk. But if they see something's a success, so you see a book like Red, White, and Royal Blue,
brilliant,
like such a phenomenon. People did not think it could make a success. It did. So now, okay, maybe if that did well, we can expand and do some other books. So I think that is a welcome trend, the increasing diversity, inclusivity of the romance genre.
I love that. Casey's one of my favorites. That's just, I'm so glad you brought up that book, because that is one of my favorite books. I just thought it was brilliantly done, and she's just an interesting person. Mm-hmm. It's very cool.
Well, that probably leads us right into your starter list, which you were kind enough to prepare for us to talk about here. Mm-hmm. And those of you who are watching, stay tuned. We'll give you an email link or something if you'd like this.
I think I'm just going to have to tell them what my email is.
Oh, okay.
We're not that sophisticated, Jayne.
Okay. All right. Explain the list and what's on it and how to get it.
Mm-hmm. It was an interesting exercise when Jayne and JT talked about this and discussing romance fiction. I think, and this goes back to my time in libraries, not just in bookstores, but if you're a reader, it can be overwhelming to go into a library or a bookstore if you're just looking for something good to read. You don't exactly have a specific author or title in mind. You just, maybe you've been in college and now you have some free time, so you want to read, or you've been a stay-at-home mom and the kids are grown up. For some reason, you want to re-experience the joy you had previously as a reader. So you go into a bookstore or a library and you're overwhelmed. There's like 10,000 choices. You don't know what to pick. It's like going to the grocery store without a list. You're just wandering around, and you probably gravitate to the New York Times bestseller list and just pick something because people say it's good because it's on a bestseller list. So the idea was to create a more manageable list of options for readers. That's what we're calling this starter romance list that we created. So the parameters were that there'd be no more than 30 titles, because more than that, you start getting overwhelmed. And it's not that I couldn't find like 100 great romances or 150. There's so many out there, but it's just, you have to limit that. So that's what I did. I also wanted to represent different genres and subgenres within romance fiction. So it can't just be all my favorite kind of romances. It had to be ones that other readers would like. So that was the goal. And we did come up with a list, and it's very plain, and I'll kind of just briefly show it to you. But what it does is, if you're new to romance fiction, here's some choices for you. It gives you a little bit about the book. Oh, I also wanted to be sure the books were available in print, because it's really frustrating to hear about this wonderful, amazing book and discover you can't get it. And somewhere out there, there's a special place in publishing hell for Jennifer Cruzy's publishers, because you can't get a lot of her books other than digitally. And that is a crime, because if you could get available copies, she'd be on the list. She was an amazing writer, is an amazing writer. But so they need to be available for readers. So we do have this list. When I was compiling the list, I reverted to my librarian training and looked at other lists of best choices and best romances. And this is where it becomes interesting, Jayne and JT. Most of the lists kind of mirrored what I was looking at or thinking of. So there were obvious titles that appeared all over the place. But a couple of times I would be looking at a list, and it would be from a reputable national magazine that's been around for decades. This is one example. And I know you have to take things with a grain of salt and a sense of humor, and you can't be so serious about everything, but it kind of riles me as a romance reader, because this particular author, the list was something like the best romances to heat up your night, and then in the intro it was, these bodice rippers will make you, and I'm just like, no. No one's used the word bodice ripper since the 1980s. And no, it just immediately, as a romance reader, I'm like, no, I don't trust you. You don't know what you're talking about. And even though the list had some really great choices on it, it's just like, don't be that coy kind of mocking the genre that you're trying to cash in on at the same time, essentially. And the other thing I found on several lists was that sometimes people don't understand what a romance is. We mentioned the two key criteria, the focus on the romantic relationship, the happily ever after, happily for now ending. But these lists were coming up with choices. And again, these are wonderful books. I'm not denigrating them. I'm just saying they don't belong on a romance list. Anna Karenina. I mean, you give Anna Karenina to a romance reader, they're not going to be happy. I mean, I remember hearing another best-selling romance author talk to a group of librarians at a workshop about romance fiction, and she said about Anna Karenina, if you're the heroine of a book and you have children and you can't live without the love of your life and you walk in front of a train leaving behind those children, you're not a romance heroine. I mean, you might be a great work of literature, it might stand the test of time, it might be Tolstoy's greatest book, but no, you don't give that to a romance reader if they want a romance novel. Other examples were Me Before You by Jojo Moyes. I love Jojo Moyes. Her Last Letter to Her Lover is a terrific book, one of my favorites, but he dies at the end of the book, so no, it's not a romance novel. You're crying tears. It's the same thing. I mean, years ago, Love Story by Eric Segal was like, love means never having to say you're sorry unless you're giving it to a romance reader. Then it's I'm sorry. She dies at the end. So I just think we've come so far, and then you look and think, okay, there's still work to be done. So that was the background to the list. But anyway, we do have the list, and our solution to those who are tuning in that might be interested in it is you can either email me. My email address is John, John, C like cat, at poisonedpen.com. Or you can come into the store. I will be happy to send a copy of the list to you by email, or I can put a copy in the mail old school to you if you'd like. We have that list for you. I also want to say, if you're looking for other things to read, you are more than welcome to email me, building off this list, and say, I love Nora Roberts, or I love Sandra Brown, who's new, who's different. I'm happy to send you lists of possible suggestions for other new authors for you to try. Just send me an email, come to the store. We're happy to do that. One of the things I loved most about working in the library, and I love about working in the bookstore, is it used to be called, well, it is called Reader's Advisory in the library world. It's called hand selling, I think, in the book selling world. It's connecting readers with books they might love. It's basically playing matchmaker with books. And that is the thing that I love the most about this job. I don't love entering things into computers or dealing with packing tape or at the library unjamming copy machines. No, that was not the fun part. Fun part was helping readers discover something, a book they might love, a new author they might treasure. So feel free, again, it's just, you can email me at John, Johnc at poisonedpen.com, or email Jayne, she'll send it to me, however you want to do it.
Or me.
Or JT.
However.
We'll be happy to get that list out to you. And building off that, there's two kind of things I want to, bits of wisdom as a reader that I've discovered over the years that I want to share with other readers who are listening and that might not know about these things. And the first is, you do not have to finish every book you start. And I know there are people out there that are going to be like shouting and no, and you must. And for 30 years as a reader, it's like if I started a book, no matter how boring I thought it was, no matter, I would just poke along at it 2 pages a week until a year later it was finally done. No, you don't. If you don't enjoy the book, there's nothing wrong with giving up on it, give it to a friend, neighbor, or relative, donate it to the library. You don't have to finish that book. Your reading time is finite. You need to dedicate it to things that you enjoy reading. So I used to think you had to. There was like some unwritten rule that if you started a book, you had to finish it. No. And if you really can't go that far, well, skip to the end and read the last 30 pages, and maybe that will work for you. And the other thing is, once in a while, step out of your comfort zone as a reader and try something new. And for years, I had my favorite kind of books, cozy mysteries, and all these things. And the thought of reading a noir thriller would scare me to death as a reader, or horror. It's like, no, but maybe once a year, even twice a year, it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be every week, every month, but just once in a while, maybe if you've never read historical fiction, see what's out there, try something, you may discover a new genre. So those just are my 2 bits of wisdom I've discovered over the years.
So who have you read recently that you're recommending right now? Who's on your
Well, I do have some books, and I don't know if they'll show up on the screen. And again, if you can't figure out what they are, if it sounds confusing, email me, I can clarify it for you, but we'll do this real quick. These are some of my favorites. The first is a book called Wait for It by Jen Mckinley, and it came out this summer. Jen is a local author. This is kind of a contemporary romantic comedy. The basic story is Annabelle Martin is a young 30-something in Boston. She's been married twice. Don't ask her about that. She's kind of trying to find herself in life, and all of a sudden her first husband pops back up. He wants to marry her again, and that's the signal to her she has to restart her life. So she accepts a job offer from her best friend in Phoenix, moves to Phoenix to become a graphic designer. Part of the job is she gets this kind of wonderful guest cottage on a plush Phoenix estate. But the downside is the estate comes with this cranky landlord, and he gives her this list of demands. He slips it under her door, and she's constantly, breaking them inadvertently, like having parties late at night. Well, it was just 3 friends drinking wine on the patio, but to him, that's a party, So there's this kind of lovely email exchange, snarky, between them, and then she all of a sudden discovers her cranky landlord, who she thought was like a curmudgeonly 80-year-old man, is actually the hot guy she's been ogling in the house across the street. So Jen is funny, she's witty, it's light. There's a little bit of seriousness to it because the hero does kind of deal with some PTSD issues, but it's all done with flair and fun. And the book was Wait for It by Jen Mckinley. Another book that I absolutely love this year was introduced to me because Booklist sent it to me. So that's a plus to reviewing. You discover new books that you may not have picked up on your own. It's called Battle Royale by Lucy Parker. And the protagonists are Sylvia Fairchild, who was a contestant on a popular British baking show called Operation Cake until she got kicked off the show by one of the judges, Dominic De Vere, who's been called the cranky prince of pastry. He's kind of very stuffy, the opposite of Sylvia. She's free-spirited and fun and unicorns and sprinkles, and he's very classic, traditional pastry. Well, Sylvia's back on the show, but this time she's a judge. So not only does she have to work with Dominic, but all of a sudden they're both in contention to become the one to bake the wedding cake for Princess Rose's upcoming nuptials. So it's kind of that workplace romance, the humor. Oh my God, reading this book, like all I wanted to do was open up a bag of candy because of the descriptions of the food and the cake and all those things. It was just delightful. Battle Royale by Lucy Parker. It's the first in the new series. Another debut that I discovered this year was The Charm Offensive by Allison Cochran. And this is set in the world of reality television. Think The Bachelor, but in this case, the show is called Ever After. There's a Prince Charming. He selects his princess as they go through the competition. Now, Deb is one of the producers on the show, and he believes in happily ever afters. He's been with the show. True love is a real thing to him. The latest prince on the show is Charlie Winshaw, who's kind of the geeky tech millionaire who needs to rehabilitate his relationship because he kind of imploded at work one day. Well, Deb has been assigned to help Charlie kind of forge a better relationship with the princesses. He can't figure out why Charlie is not connecting with any of the contestants until a little bit further in the book, and he realizes maybe it's because Charlie isn't looking for the right princess, but the right prince in his life. And that's The Charm Offensive by Allison Cochran. Funny, there's a lot of wit to the story, but it also deals with serious issues like romance novels can, in this case dealing with mental issues like depression and dealing with things in your life, and it's all done within the context of a romance. Yes, there is a happily ever after. And if you like The Bachelor, It does make fun of it, but it's done in good taste.
Have you seen, oh, I'm sorry, you've got
okay.
another one. No,
Sure.
no, do another one.
No. Ask because I'll forget.
I was just going to ask if you have seen during COVID, during the pandemic, have you seen an uptick in people wanting books that have a happily ever after, a hopeful ever after, happily for now?
Thank you for that question, JT, because as part of my research, I did discover in one source that for over the last 12 months, ending in March 2021, print sales of romances increased 24%.
Bravo.
So, yeah, definitely. There's definitely been an interest in people. I mean, the real world is scary enough, but the last 2 years have been even scarier. So people want something that gives them hope for the future, and that's what romances do. And I'll also make this note to all the romance naysayers out there that romance fiction continues to be the second most best-selling fiction genre of all time, nearly 20% of the adult fiction market. It's only exceeded by the broad category of adult fiction, which I think is
pretty broad. Yeah,
it's the Oprah Winfrey, Reese Witherspoon book club picks or something like that. Another one favorite was by Mia Sosa, and it's called The Worst Best Man. Now, this is not actually a new book. It came out about 1.5 years ago, but the reason I'm talking to you about it today is because Mia did have a book scheduled for this April, but with everything that's happened in publishing, it got pushed back and it got pushed back. It's now coming out next April 2022. I can't wait for it because I love Mia's work. I discovered her again through Booklist, but this book will keep you tided over until then. The book focuses on a wedding planner, Carolina Santos in Washington, D.C., who's just been given the chance of a dream job. It's working as an event planner for a boutique hotel chain in the Washington, D.C. area. It will be a step up for her. It's everything she's dreamed of. There's only one hitch. To win the job, she has to partner with a marketing expert and come up with a plan. And that marketing expert happens to be Max Hartley, who was the brother and best man of Andrew Hartley, who dumped Carolina at the altar 3 years ago. So it's funny, it's got humor. There's a lot about her culture in there. Her family has a restaurant, Carolina's, and they talk about the different foods and things like that. The sequel will focus on another character from the series. It's not really a sequel, but the spin-off, and that comes in April 22. But for now, if you're looking for something fun, bridal related, The Worst Best Man by Mia Sosa. And I'll do a couple more real quick for those who like historical romances. This is new also. It's A View Most Glorious by Regina Scott. It's the third in her American Wonder series, which are each centered around a different national park, like Yellowstone. Grand Canyon was the first two. This is Mount Rainier. And in the book, there's the protagonist, Cora Baxter, is active in the suffragist movement. It's the 1890s in Oregon. And the women in that group think that one way they can prove to men they deserve the vote is if they have a woman climb Mount Rainier. And Cora's been nominated to do that. So she, of course, has to have a guide, and that turns out to be rough around the edges Nathan Hardy, who's reluctant to take her up the mountain until he thinks she's fully invested in the seriousness of it. So this is about their relationship as they work together to climb the mountain. It's about the history of Oregon at the time. Mount Rainier apparently went through several proposed name changes before they settled on Mount Rainier. What I loved was the little details that Regina Scott puts into the book. They go shopping for supplies at this emporium in Oregon, Seattle, actually, I think, that's still around today. And they have to buy things like blue tinted glasses because the snow at the top of Mount Rainier is so bright that they would not be able to really function without having some way to screen them. But it's just a fascinating story. It's definitely a sweeter romance. So if you want something that's just more on that side of the spectrum, you like that. It's A View Most Glorious by Regina Scott. And the last historical that I have is another favorite that I discovered a few years ago. It's called Infamous by Minerva Spencer. and it's part of her Outcasts of the Ton, Rebels of the Ton series. What I think is brilliant about this book is the author takes chances with the storyline that sometimes publishers don't want authors to do. It's about Celia Trent, and it's set during the 1800s, early 1800s in Regency England. She's kind of the belle of the ball, the diamond of first water. She's ruled over the Ton with her beauty and her wit, and she's basically made life miserable for anyone she doesn't like. So she's the Regency equivalent of a mean girl in this book. And she's picked on a number of people, including Richard Redvers. She kind of gets everyone to call him odious in the Ton. And this goes on for a few years. And then, of course, Celia experiences her own downfall. Family money disappears. She's reduced to working as a companion for a cranky old lady. It's how the mighty have fallen. Well, she has to attend a house party, winter wedding with her employer, the dowager, and she goes to the house party only to discover that one of the families that's getting married is the Redvers family, and Richard is part of the wedding party. He's the best man, and he's now a world famous entomologist, wealthy, successful, everything that Celia isn't. So it's kind of that, how do you redeem a character, a heroine, who is such, we'll use the word witch at the beginning of the book, and show how she can become a person who the hero could like. And it's really done brilliantly. I mean, because she does realize she was mean to people. She experiences that remorse. She tries to change it. There's a lot about the Regency science world, collecting bugs and all those other things, which I was not a fan of, but you can kind of move through those parts quickly. It's funny and witty. Minerva's been writing for a few years. If you're looking for a new historical romance writer, she would be one of my picks to give you. So those are just a few of the things I've been reading recently that I've loved and enjoyed.
Oh,
Are they on the list?
what's that?
Well, some of them are, some of them aren't. It was one of those things where like, okay, who do I cut to make it? I mean, do I take Mary Stewart off the list and put somebody else on? It's like, that's what I hate about this, because you never have everything you want. But I would be happy to send the titles and what I have about them to anyone who's interested. This is really, I know it sounds sappy, but that's what I really enjoy the most about books, because I remember discovering that magic when you pick up a book without any expectations and you suddenly just basically fall in love with the story and the reader. And actually, I'll mention one other book, which is not a mystery, but I discovered just last week, and the same thing happened. It's a debut, I guess you'd call it a legal thriller, All Her Little Secrets by Wanda Morris. It's set in Atlanta. The protagonist is a lawyer there. She's been working with her boss. They worked at a previous firm. He brought her over to this new private law firm. She's one of the few, I think, if only African Americans in the firm. She goes into work one day. Her employer, lover / whatever you want to call it, asked her to meet him at the office at 6 a.m., which is unusual, but not totally unusual for lawyers. She goes into the office building. It's pretty much deserted except for basic security, goes up to his office, opens the door, and he's dead. Looks like it might initially be suicide, but she doesn't want to take the risk of getting caught up and having people discover their other less professional relationship. She panics, basically, like anybody would do. So she closes the door, scurries back down a couple floors to her office, and just waits for somebody else to find the body and notify everyone. Well, it turns out it wasn't suicide, it was murder. And now she's caught up in this investigation, because if she doesn't figure out who it is, it's very likely it's going to get pinned on her. There's this whole background of this law firm that's got something dark and devious going on, because she's not exactly clued into all the things, but she can sense that her boss was involved in something he didn't want to be involved in. It's just a wonderful book. I read it, that voice, the author's voice, just pulled me in immediately to that story. And it reminded me in the best possible way of when I read The Firm by John Grisham. You still have that lawyer kind of dealing with dark secrets. And the book was All Her Little Secrets by Wanda Morris. It's a debut. So if you're not a romance reader and you're listening in, there's your book to read if you like thrillers.
That sounds amazing.
This has been absolutely fabulous. Thank you so much for the reading list and for the recommendations and for talking to us about working at the pen. And thank you, as a romance writer, I want to thank you again for all that you have done to celebrate our genre.
Well, thank you, Jayne, for writing such great books. And thank you, JT. I can also say that if you're looking for one of those books that have the Gothic touch, Her Dark Secrets, did I get the title right?
Her Dark Lies.
Her Dark Lies. Secrets, Lies have been so
All the little secrets,
tonight.
Her Dark, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just thought you did a brilliant job with that, with your kind of homage to Rebecca. And yet,
Absolutely. I totally agree that I just love that book. All Her Dark Lies.
Now we're going to be calling it All Her Dark.
Yeah.
All Her Dark
Into the
Secret
book.
Lies.
By JT down there.
Yes. You can find it by the author's name if you don't remember the title.
Your passion for the books and this genre is just unparalleled. And thank you so much for everything. It's been so much fun talking to you tonight.
Well, thank you.
It's tonight for me. I know it's not tonight for y'all.
Well, thank you, JT, and thank you, Jayne, for the work that you do on behalf of other authors, for the wonderful books you write, and for your support of bookstores. And thank everyone for tuning in. We're glad to have you as customers.